Stay more comfortable, more concealed, and in the stand longer with Osseo gear. Premium camouflage apparel created for bow hunters by bow hunters. Osseo's revolutionary patented camo patterns and innovative features are designed to keep whitetail bow hunters totally invisible and dead quiet. Elevate your game with Osseo. Visit asiogear.com and take 20% off your purchase with code TRUTH20. Mobile hunters, our buddies over at Tethered are always innovating to keep us more mobile and in the game when it counts. From the Tethered One Sticks, the Fast Pack, to the Ultra Lock saddle, Tethered is always designing to increase comfort and utility while reducing bulk, weight, and fiddle factor of mobile hunting gear. And now, they've outdone themselves yet again by creating the carbon fiber forged Predator CFX platform, the latest fully featured mobile saddle platform that raises the bar for what's possible in mobile hunting gear. Whether you're new to saddle hunting or an old tree climbing veteran, go to tetherednation.com for all your saddle hunting gear. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And I got you guys know that mustache fella on the other side there. It's my good buddy, Mr. Beau Martonik. What's going on, buddy?
Nothing much, man. It's good to get to be back on your podcast and,
That's right.
and talking. You know, for a while there, I thought you didn't like me anymore, and you know, I'm just kidding.
It's funny. Dude, you know you're my boy, man.
I know.
It's funny. Excuse me. I was just talking to Chad last night, and we were just kind of mentioning how, you know, you have friends that, you know, that you don't text or you don't talk to for a while or whatever. And then like when you do, it's like, you just like immediately pick back up like you were talking yesterday. And I was like, you know, we were both like, that's always like a sign that like, that you have a good friend. That's a real friend, you know, that you can go weeks, months, sometimes not, you know, without even chatting with each other. And then all of a sudden you like shoot a text or get on a phone real quick. And it's like, boom, you pick right back up where you left off. And it was like, no time has ever passed, you know?
Yeah. No, you texted me and you're like, hey, you got any time this week? Jump on the show. Always got time for you, Clint. Come on.
Right? And not to mention, like we basically did like almost like an entire podcast before we started recording the podcast.
Yeah, I know we did.
Yeah,
we do that every time too.
Every time. It's either before or after every single time. It's like we could record literally like 3 of them, you know, in the amount of time we spend kind of chatting outside the time that we're actually on the podcast in general. But so what's shaking, man? What's going on in your neck of the woods, dude?
Oh man, it's I've been really excited here. Well, now we're in late July as we're recording this, and just like I'm a little over a month away from
it's almost here
going elk hunting, and then even deer season. It's been like just absolutely awesome to go out and be able to find like all the mast and fruit. Like the apple trees are great this year, acorns, black cherries, like everything food wise is like really good. We've got a lot of rain this year, and just like I feel really confident about things. So I'm really pumped about the season.
Nice. I did see your video about apples, but the acorns, man, like, so this part of the state, we haven't had a lot of rain. Like just recently in the past couple of days, we started getting rain, but we were super dry for a long time, where my wife she took a walk just around like our neighborhood. There's like a park that's like adjacent to us, and she like walks through there most every day. And she came back and she's like, I saw a bunch of acorns dropping. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah. And I was like, this can't be acorns. It's like, you probably don't know what you're looking at, you know? So I went on a walk there, like, you know, a day or two later, and I'm walking, and like, sure enough, like on the road, like there's a white oak that's there. And then I started reading a little bit, and I guess apparently, and like, shame on me for not knowing this previously, but like whenever you have really dry conditions, like sometimes those immature acorns will fall just for lack of rain. And that was what was happening. So I'm like, dang, man. I'm like, there's a handful of spots that I have that like I was really hoping that the acorns would produce this year, because I won't say they're dependent on it, but when you have a good acorn year in those spots, like it's bananas, you know. And so I need to, when I get back into check cameras, I need to kind of scope that out, because if it's a bad year for that, I might have to cross a couple of those spots off my list, because I've hunted them on good years and I've hunted them on off years. And the off years, it was almost not worth even being in there, so to speak. Like the sign is like dries up, and just like the camera intel dries up, like, you know, all of it kind of dries up. So
Yeah. No, I got some spots to check yet to make sure. It just seems like everywhere I've been, even just driving down the roads, it's just like all of the trees have acorns. So it's like that was interesting to see. I haven't seen a year like this in quite a while for
Right.
in my areas for it. But I was talking to somebody else that was in a different part of the state, and they've been hit with gypsy moth so bad
Mm,
again that like some of those trees probably won't make it because it's year two
right.
and three that they're getting hit, and it just looks like when I was down at Seven Springs shooting tack, holy cow, like that area was just it looked like it was wintertime in the
Wow.
summer when you were shooting, and there's just all the caterpillars that were hanging and dropping on your arms, and it was
Mm,
just kind of gnarly in that respect. But I mean, that's why for the most part, a lot of my rut areas have no oak trees at all because I just know it's more consistent year after year because they're not
mm.
dependent and they're not moving for that food because they just have the browse.
Right. Yeah. That's the difference for me between hunting close to my house and hunting in the North Piece is that close to my house, I can find, and I have pockets that have, good acorn production, like if it's a good year or whatever. And those are the spots that have historically dried up. Right. And then I have some spots that are like, really good kind of pre-rut kind of spots to your point that aren't really dependent on having a good crop of acorns or whatever. And then in the North Piece, for whatever reason, most of the spots that I've hunted and found good deer is completely void of any mast trees, like at all,
Hmm.
and it all is primarily browse. And to your point, it's like I've found way more consistency in that. Now, I don't get the same volume of deer on those cameras necessarily, right?
Yep.
But I get consistency of deer year over year in those spots, to where it's like, those places that I've found, and you've probably seen the same things, like if they're acorn dependent to a degree, or not even say acorn dependent, but acorn influenced might be a way to say
Yeah.
it, right? The it'll be like there's a huge delta between like a good year and like a less than good year in terms of deer
Yeah.
activity, right? And just like number of targets potentially that you could identify in that spot or maybe be able to hunt in that spot. Like to juxtapose that to an area like the North Piece where it's like I don't have a lot of that stuff, and I may not have nearly as many deer on camera, but the ones that are there like are going to be consistent, like and they're gonna be there, Where and I'm curious to see, like I'm assuming you probably see the same type of thing.
Oh yeah, yeah, 100%. And the thing is, this areas without mast, it definitely makes it more difficult in early October and stuff
Hmm.
to get on deer. And there's so much more random because browse is everywhere, so it's just a
Yeah.
lot more meandering, and they're bedding in 100 different places versus a couple that they know this is where I'm going in the evening to feed. It's they're just kind of wandering around a little bit more, so it's more difficult to know that. But once you start getting into some of the scrape stuff and
Hmm.
pre-rut and the rut, it's like okay, the doe groups are in the same type of areas, and they have these patterns and that they come back on an annual basis more so than figuring out okay, hey, they're this week they're feeding on this tree and in this group of trees or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm looking forward to it, man. This fall should be good. I was out in the travel trailer. I had to get something out of it, and I don't remember if said this to you or if I said it to somebody else. I was like, but it has a distinct smell in there, and it's weird because it still smells like the wood that I made it from. Like, because I thought it would like have dissipated by now. I thought after the first year it would smell like rat's ass in that thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, from hunting out of it and being stinky. But it still smells like the wood. So every time I get in there and I smell that, it's like it reminds me of hunting season. And then this morning before we jumped on the podcast, took the dog out to feed him, and it's been really hot here in PA, and obviously being in PA, it's just been really hot like the past couple weeks. And this morning was like the first morning I went out that was not oppressively humid and not already like 75 degrees where it was like 65, low humidity. And I'm like, ooh, this feels like starting to feel like a cool morning, And I was
Yeah.
like, then I start to get jazzed. And that's like, it's those two things. It's like the smell of the trailer and that first little like break in the weather in the morning whenever I have my coffee and take my dog out to feed him, where I'm like, that kind of snaps me into like, all right, it's almost go time. It's almost
Yeah.
it's almost my favorite time of year, essentially.
Yeah, I went out to shoot my bow this morning, and I threw a hoodie on. Like it was just like a nice. It was. I mean, I think it was 57 here,
Mhm.
and man, it was awesome. Like just it was just like a noticeable, not the mugginess in the air, just like feeling. It's gonna get hot today. I think it's supposed to still get up close to 80, but just like that morning, like that. I'm like, yes, that felt really good.
I know, dude. I'm smiling like ear to ear because it's
Yeah.
like I get because it signals hunting season. And it also signals like it's time that I can start to break out the fire pit in the evenings and sit around the fire pit. Like that's two of my
Yep.
favorite. Like one of my favorite things to do is that. But man, since the last time we talked, I was on the East Meets West podcast. There, I don't remember when we did. It was like it was either early spring or late winter. I forget
Yeah.
when the episode was. And we did a bunch of catching up during that episode. But since then, one of the things that has kind of progressed, and I don't even know if we talked about it on your show or not, I don't know if we talked about it together. But the Sunday, I just got all my tags for PA, like got all those ordered, done, and love the online system. And I know there's a bunch of people out there that hate it, and I don't understand. I don't understand why, but I like it. Got all my tags, and it made me start to think. And I went back and I saw like the news clipping that kind of came through or whatever. But it seems like every year we inch closer and closer to actually having Sunday hunting. Like it's almost like it made like another. I think it was like late last month. It made like another leap forward where it's like entered another round of review or whatever the case is, for approval. And I guess first question is just how are you feeling about that? Like, do you think it's going to actually come to fruition, and do you like it?
I think no, I think it's going to come to fruition. Personally, I think there's definitely people that are opposed to it, but it's such a small scale compared to those that are, and it's been getting so much pressure for a lot of time. I definitely could see it. I don't have my crystal ball in front of me to see how soon that's going to happen, but even when I was doing a podcast with Nick Pinizzotto from NDA, and he
Mhm.
was like, I think it's pretty close to
Yeah.
um, pushing through, and I'm a fan of it
Mhm.
personally. I think not even from right now I have a lot more of a flexible schedule than I used to, so it's not as big of a deal for me personally. But for anybody, it's like I think of it from kids more than anything. It's like, okay, you have, football games on Saturdays that are during their school week. It's like, when do they get a chance to get introduced to hunting and have that availability and that time? And I think Sundays really be able to help that out, and
Right.
yeah, I think you and I did a podcast on this. Do you remember this in
Years ago, yeah, it was at
2018?
BHA, right? It was at
Yeah.
the BHA rendezvous thing that they did at Muster in the Mountains. I think is what it's
Yeah,
called,
it was
right?
either 2018 or 19 that we did that. It was a long time ago, but you
Yeah.
and I both did with former director of the Game Commission Brian Burhans, and we talked about it then. And 'cause actually someone was saying something recently. I did a controversial podcast on the Monday and Saturday opener that everyone's like, why aren't you focusing on Sunday more so? Like, I'm like, man, I feel like I've talked about it a lot, but really it's probably
Right.
been a while since I've, publicly, talked about that. But just being able to have that increased opportunity throughout the season to be able to have, weekends. Thinking about like, especially you say you're hunting, say you only have weekends to be able to hunt, and it's like sometimes it takes a few days to really get in it. That first day it's like, okay, and now I know I need to move over here the next day or
Mhm.
whatever it is, and it just gives you that ability to have consecutive days when you're off work to be able to do so. And like
Yeah.
from a private land perspective, that if there's like farmers that aren't a big fan of it, I mean, they really have the opportunity to say that that they don't want to allow it, and that's fine. Like they
Right.
can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm kind of in the same boat. For the life of me, I never really understood why we didn't have it. Yeah. I mean, I understand technically why, right? There's politics, and things involved in it that keep it from happening, blue laws, etc. Um, but you know, for me, it was always disappointing that in order to enjoy vacation and a full week of hunting that I couldn't really ever. I shouldn't say I couldn't, but I wouldn't ever spend it in Pennsylvania because I wouldn't be able to hunt a portion of my vacation, essentially. Like just calling it what it is, right?
Yeah.
especially early on when I first started travel hunting. The reason why I started traveling to hunt was there was two main reasons. One was I was going for like a certain type of experience that I wanted to chase, like a certain, maturity of an animal or whatever. And that I was finding more easily in other states. And the second one was is I wanted to be able to hunt on Sundays. Like, if I have 7 days off, I want to be able to hunt 7 days, not the 5 days in the middle, essentially. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and that was that was like one of the big reasons why. I'm obviously a fan of it. I think to your point, introducing kids, is critical. I think how many times have you looked at trail camera photos and been like, yep, would have hunted that spot that Sunday. You know what I mean? Like, and I know like it's a revisionist history a little bit, right? Where it's like, you go back and you look and you're like, well, I would have been there on Sunday, but I can say with confidence, there was a handful of times there was like a specific spot I was hunting where it's like, I knew and I got the right wind for the spot, and that's the spot I would have been in. And, sure enough, there was, a deer that was in the area that I wanted to hunt or whatever.
Well, how many times in the last few years has it been Sundays have the best cold fronts that push through, and it's like, what? And I'll be out because so I'll still be in the woods on Sundays now, but I'm out checking trail cameras.
I would check, I do the same thing.
And it's just like, see, like during the rut, be seeing just deer just like acting like zombie mode on the Sunday. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, this is terrible. Like, this is what I've been waiting for.
I know, man. It's like whenever you're not there and you can't be there, it's almost like they know, to a degree. But yeah, I'm stoked to hopefully see it come through. And I mean, it was a nice little tease, I guess, the 3 Sundays that we do have,
Mm-hmm.
And I take full advantage of those and enjoy it. And it was just one of those things where I'm like, I just want more of it. It's like I want to be able to spend as much time as I can in the woods chasing critters, chasing deer specifically for me, and it's, especially it's not to get on like a rant of inflation and blah, 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 blah. But, the cost to live is more than it's ever, is more challenging than it's ever been for a lot of folks. Right. And so you see more and more people having to work, multiple jobs to try to make things work. Right. And so that means you're probably working Saturdays, working a double on Monday or whatever the case is. And like, if you're a person who wants to go hunt, but can't because now you work Saturdays, or whatever the case is, you're just kind of shit out of luck, And I think that's the thing for me is like the reality of like how we live has changed. And so the reality of our recreation probably needs to change as well. Right. And I'm also never usually a fan of regulating somebody's ability to experience or exercise. It's not a right, it's a privilege. So I hate whenever people say, well, hunting's a right. It's not a right, it's a privilege to hunt. They can take your license away for a multitude of reasons, just like driving isn't a right, it's a privilege, right? You have to do things correctly and stay in good standing with the state in order to continue to do it, right? Yep. But I'm never a fan of limiting people's opportunities in really any capacity, right? And that's the part I never really understood. It's like, well, why would people not want people to hunt on Sunday? It's like, it's just, why would you ever want to take the ability from someone to, exercise that privilege, and that just never made sense to me either.
Well, the thing that I whenever I look at those types of things, it's a lot of it comes down to like, okay, is that going to have, an impact on, say, the deer populations or anything else? And it's just, you look at all the other states that have done it or moved that way, and it hasn't. And it's not like, okay, and there's also, a difference, and this was something that had some pushback on, I'd said this before, but, if you extend gun season by an extra week or two, like that's going to have an impact versus, adding Sundays in throughout, all the seasons, not excluding gun season, but and there's also this case of not, you can give people as much opportunity as they could ever imagine or want, And a lot of times they're not going to take advantage of that for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Not maybe it's like that they have to work or be able to do so, but being able to have that ability to be able to hunt on Sundays, in my opinion, is really something that could help out so much. And
Right.
I
Yeah.
think that with that,
Yeah, and it's to your point. It's like, just because Sundays would be open wouldn't mean that all of a sudden every hunter in the world is going to hunt Sundays. Going to hunt every single Sunday. You know what I mean? It's like there's still going to be times where someone has, whatever the case is, they've got a family engagement, or they've got to work that Sunday, or they're not feeling well, or they're just tired and don't want to go do it. Like whatever the case is, right? Like it's like, but you have that ability because it's limited, right? I will say, like, you're making choices, I mean, it's easy choices for me, right? Because, if my daughter has something going on Saturday, it's like I'm going to do whatever it is she's got going on, and I'm not going to hunt that day. Just, it is what it is, But it'd be nice to have the choice, be like, yeah, I'm going to skip Saturday and I'll go out on Sunday. Not a big deal,
Yep.
But for some people, it's, especially like, I have a somewhat flexible schedule, so I can get out during the week some and stuff like that. So it's not as important for me, but the person who's working, a regular, 7 to 3 schedule or 8 to 4 schedule somewhere that has to go to like a brick and mortar place, right? Not work from home or whatever. It's like, and it don't have that flexibility. It's like, then they're just kind of shit out of luck. You know what I mean? If they have a family event on Saturday or whatever the case is. And to your point, it's like the whole management of the deer population and stuff like that. It's like, man, every other state does this. You know what I mean? It's like, no, I get it. Not every state has the hunter numbers that we have. So I will say that, right? So if you look at some of the Western states or whatever, it's like, I would say Ohio is probably the closest, but even their hunter numbers pale in comparison to ours. Michigan would be probably a better proxy, you know, where it's like, look, they have a sustainable herd, pretty similar hunter numbers, and they hunt Sundays, so not a big deal.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on with how you're thinking about that. But what are things people can do now, like to help influence it or put the the pressure on? Is there? I don't even know what the latest is personally. That's why I'm kind of asking that.
Yeah, I think it moved. Don't quote me on it, but I feel like it passed the House earlier, and I think it finally made it through the Senate maybe, and it's going to now be placed in like whatever the next step is for like an official vote, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, I think the things to do, as always, is just contact your officials that represent your locations and make them aware that it's something that you support and want done. I think the biggest part of that has the biggest push for that has happened at this point now. So I think, I don't want to say it's out of our hands to a degree, but I think now it's kind of gotten the momentum that it required to get to a point now to where it becomes more of a, everyone who we wanted to support it at this point, I think kind of supported it. Right. At least that's what I heard too. Like the concessions that needed to be made by like the Farm Bureau and stuff like that. Like they had their kumbaya moment of like what they're going to get, we'll get Sundays. They'll get some, I think it was like stricter trespassing laws and stuff like that. I think was like the big sticking point and things like that. I think one of the things that I heard that was still a little bit of a sticking point, and don't quote me on this because I was just skimming the article really quick the other day, was just the fact that now game wardens would have to work on Sundays now as well. That'd be like another work day. And I stopped and I kind of thought about it for a second. I was like, well, why weren't they working Sundays anyway? Not that I want people to work 7 days a week, like, not that someone has to work 7 days a week, but like, they should have people working Sundays in general, right? Because they operate under the same, I don't want to say jurisdiction, but they operate under the same like capability of like a state trooper, right? Like they have the same kind of like the same entitlement, if you will. And that's probably not the right word to use, and they work Sundays. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like the state police take Sundays off. You know what I mean? It's like,
you're like, all right, nobody do bad shit.
No one do bad shit on Sundays because we're not working. You know what I mean? Like, so that didn't make any sense to me. It's like, well, why weren't they working Sundays anyway? I was like, so, but yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, I think the things that they're talking about now are like smaller minutia. I think the larger hurdles have gotten overcome. I will say, I think that we're going to have Sunday hunting in 2025. I think that's when it'll happen. I think it'll be next year. I mean, it said in the article it wouldn't be this year because they've already put out the regulations, all that stuff for this year. So we'll have the 3 that we've had historically the past 5 seasons, I think. But I would anticipate 2025 will be the first year that Pennsylvania sees statewide Sunday hunting across the board.
Yeah.
Would be
Yeah,
my guess.
that would be awesome to be able to see that and have it
Yeah.
come to fruition.
Well, because now it's like when I hunt on a Sunday, it's like I'm looking at and I remember the first Sunday that we had available. I went out and I hunted, and I was like, kept looking. I'm like, man, is this the right freaking Sunday? I was like, I'm going to shoot the biggest deer I ever killed, and it's going to be the wrong freaking Sunday. You know what I mean? It's like, you know what I mean? Like just paranoid.
Yeah,
it
feels wrong. It's like
it does. I felt like it was like my mom was going to walk in and catch me with a nudie mag. You know what I'm saying?
It made me like the first time that I was on private land in a place that allowed baiting, and I walked up and saw a bait pile, and I was like, oh man, like this is not like this ain't good, and then it's like, oh wait, like this is allowed.
Right. Oh man. So how do you think if we do have Sundays, right, do you think that we'll start to see more and more people? Let me ask it this way. Do you think that we'll ever see Pennsylvania become not to the same magnitude as the Midwest, but a destination whitetail state? Say no. Say no. I don't want anyone to know.
I think what we would see is it be more of a destination to the neighboring states. And I've heard this from people in New York, Ohio, Maryland, West Virginia, those places. It's like I'd be more apt to buy a Pennsylvania tag if I could go up and hunt a weekend or take a Friday off and have a long weekend to be able to go. I think you will see that just from an opportunity standpoint. But I mean, say for example, New York's one of those examples where they can shoot multiple bucks. West Virginia, same way. So it's maybe not going to be as much from that, but Ohio is, say, a $1 state. Say someone shoots one in October and they want to continue to hunt. It's like, okay, I can jump over to Pennsylvania and do that. Maybe they're doing that already, but
right.
I could see some of those opportunities. I don't see in the short term Pennsylvania being a destination spot per se, really, because just the amount of hunters, I think. And also, I think the stigma is out there worse than it probably is with some of that.
Stigma.
So,
let's keep that stigma.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
There's no good deer here. Stay in Ohio and wherever else you're at.
Yeah. Now everybody in Ohio is going to be sending you hate mail.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. No, I agree with you because, I mean, I've contemplated in years past of just getting even just like a jersey tag because it's just, not far away from me and I can hunt Sundays, and I'm sure if, Sunday hunting's allowed, we'll definitely see some of those bordering states, people pop over. Cause why wouldn't you at that point, especially if you're right along the border, like, if you live if you live right across the Pennsylvania line in Ohio, where it's like, you buy your groceries and gas in Pennsylvania, but you live in Ohio. You know what I mean? Like one of those types of things. Like why wouldn't you do it?
Yeah, and someone was talking to me about this, and they were like, well, we don't want non-residents here. I'm like, listen, I'm a non-resident in 49 states. Like, yes, like exactly. And I like going to other places, and it brings in revenue and it helps out. Like you can't hate on the non-residents. That's not a good way of looking about it, especially with like. I heard it a lot recently about the elk tags, and it was like, why do they even have a chance to get a tag? There are elk. It's like, well, no, that's not the right way of looking at it, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah. No. 100%. And I agree with you. It's like I would welcome people coming to PA to hunt. I mean, it makes things maybe a little bit more challenging. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like what I would grandiose. It would be awesome if like we had enough people who wanted to come here to where like you had like a non-resident. Like lottery or something like that. Not that I want to limit, because I've talked to Tony Peterson about this, where, if for whitetail states in general, like it's becoming challenging. Like you're seeing more and more like limitations. It's looking more and more like the Midwest or like big game Western hunting, right?
Yeah.
With like points and lotteries and stuff like that. And you don't want to see it move to that because you don't want to limit people's opportunities, right? But you also have to do what's best for the for the game. And I'm not saying like some of those states out there that have done that are doing what's best for the game per se, you know. I think that's the argument, right? Is that it's limited opportunities, but the reason why they're being limited, and Chad and I talked about this, it's like it's more because of access, not because of herd dynamics per se. It's more about like there's just not enough access to land for people to effectively, you know, not be on top of each other. So it's limiting opportunities.
Yeah.
And so I don't necessarily want to see that, but like, you know, it would be cool if PA had enough interest and we had enough quality deer that, you know, that a non-resident could only come here every other year. You know what I mean? Something like Kansas or whatever, where it's like you could probably go every other year if you really wanted to, you know. Helps bring in more money in the coffers to help manage the resource and stuff like that, you know. But I don't know that you and I'll ever see that in our lifetime.
Yeah, I don't know if we will either, but I mean, I don't know. It's so when I talk about these things, I can go down, you know, I'll think of something, I'll be like, oh, that's a good idea, and then I find like 25 holes in my plan, or my thought, and that's why it is so complicated and why it's so difficult to be able to make these regulations and be able to kind of figure that out. But it's you know, it's yeah, I think it'll be a little while before it becomes a destination state. Because I do know some people even that have listened to the podcast that have come and hunted PA and hunted the mountains, and they get into an area like we were talking about that don't have any oak trees, and a lot of places have oak trees in the places that are public in the mountains, and they're like, what do you do? I'm like there's no mass. It's like, yeah. It's like, I haven't seen a deer in 3 days.
That's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Come to PA. Don't see any deer for a week. It's awesome.
Yeah.
But you might see it. But you might see a good one. You know.
Yeah.
That's the ticket. And I mean, I think that's the cool thing that, you know, that you and I've both been able to see. You know, since, you know, I mean, I know I'm older than you, but, you know, I think even in, you know, your lifetime is just like the growth of the quality in Pennsylvania that we have now that we didn't have. Like, certainly whenever I was a kid growing up, and like, I'm assuming probably for you too, you know, it's like, I still remember like when you saw a rack buck, like that was a big deal. You know what I mean? Like that was, you wrote home about like you saw an 8-point, like it might've been like a 85-inch 8-point, but you were like, that's a hammer, you know? And now,
oh yeah.
You know, now it's just like, you know,
well,
there's good deer in PA. Like, well, I guess we'll just say that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. But like when I was a kid, it was right when APRs kind of came in. So the antler point restrictions. And so you were starting to see better deer. But I remember when I was 13, I shot an 8-point that was 21 inches wide, short tines. I mean, I think he scored 118 inches. Like, it wasn't anything, you know, crazy, but it was like, you know, I won the big buck contest in the paper for the youth division, and everyone's like, oh, you'll never, like, you shot your best buck of your lifetime, like, that young, like, you're used up basically, and
you're like, washed, kid.
and it's gotten, you know, it's gotten better across the board to be able to see, you know, deer able to live to maturity. The you know, APRs help with that, and then also the forest management has gotten better on public ground and private tracks as well, and just people, I think being a little bit more choosy on some of that as far as what they're shooting is helped some of the quality, and deer just get age on it to be able to hit some of their actual potential for it, and so we're starting to see the rewards of some of that.
Yeah, I know even for me, just in my local area, I haven't found locally. I'm usually good for like 1 or 2 really good deer locally, you know, that I'll kind of find. And where I live locally is suburbia, you know, so there's not large tracts of public. But the top end deer that I was consistently finding, you know, several years ago has kind of gone down a little bit, where it's like I'm not finding that. You know, and like a real good, like bigger deer for this area would be like anything that's probably like in the 130s to 140s. You know, there was one I ran into, I think it was 2 years ago. He was probably in the 50s, really unique deer. But I would usually find like 1 or 2 of those a year, you know, and I haven't found those as consistent. But what I will say is I've found larger groups of better deer every year than I had the years prior. So like, the overall floor has been raised. If you know what I'm saying. Like I feel like I am not finding the same number of like, what I'll call like the top 5 to 10% of deer that I was consistent finding before, but the average has come up, where it's like I'm now seeing deer in these areas that I'm either hunting or if I'm watching them through trail camera, where I'm seeing crops of like borderline mature deer. And when I say borderline mature deer, though, I'm seeing like crops of like 3-year-olds that have a lot of potential, right? That are going to be that are good deer, that have the opportunity to make it to 4, where even just like 5 years ago, I wasn't seeing that. I was seeing like the handful of deer that were slipping through the cracks and had like a hidey hole somewhere, you know what I mean? That just did make it to 4, you know what I mean? To where now, but then outside of that, it was just like a lot of 2-year-olds, Now I'm seeing a lot more 3-year-olds consistently that have the opportunity to get to 4, which is cool to see for this area.
Yeah, and I'm seeing like and I live in a more rural area, so it's a little bit different. But like I'm seeing more of those 5 and 6-year-old deer that are coming, and year after year, even areas that get pounded by gun pressure, is that their deer year after year hit my trail cameras. Like I don't worry as much anymore of like, oh, did this deer make it through, as much as trying to figure out where he's going to be that next year, because there's probably a pretty good chance that he's going to make it through.
Especially once they get to that age, because they figured something. Like I hate saying that they figured something out, because I think we give them more credit than they did. Like they're not an analytical thinker. They're instinct survivor, right? That's how they operate, right?
They were a dumb young deer like anything else, and got lucky on escaping death enough times that they've learned from it enough to find where they feel safe. That's my opinion with it. But you're seeing more of that, and I believe that I can go to any ridge and find a mature deer, and that's pretty awesome to be able to see that in Pennsylvania. That doesn't mean they're going to have a 150-inch rack. They might still have a small rack or a smaller rack on them, even with age. But you're seeing a lot more, or at least I'm seeing a lot more of that as I'm spread out and I'm covering a bunch of different areas, and being able to see that. So it's really cool to see.
And same, whenever I had to head north and it get more rural, it's the same type of thing, where like the deer that got killed last year that I hunted for 2 seasons, that deer was 6.5, I think, when he got killed last year. And that's because I had 3 years of trail camera data, and like the first year I saw him, like he was at least a 3-year-old, if not a 4-year-old, and then a couple deer that I know of for this year, like I know are in the 5+ category, and so that's, I don't want to say that's new for PA, because I think in some of those more rural areas, like there's just been more mature deer consistently, just by the nature of the number of the amount of land versus the number of hunters, right? Where the inverse is true locally for me, where there's not nearly as much land and there's way more hunters, like in this area. You know what I mean? But I'm seeing it more and more consistently in that area, which is awesome to see. Where it's like same as you, where I'm like, when I put out truck cameras and I'm scouting and stuff like that, I have pretty good confidence, no matter what piece I kind of go on to, once I spend a little time to learn it, that I'm going to be able to find a handful of mature deer in that area. Yeah. And that's something for me that, growing up as a kid in PA, like you just didn't have that. Like that just didn't exist.
Yeah, no, that's you're spot on there. And honestly, even in the areas that are lower deer density, it seems like the deer density is growing too. Like I'm seeing more deer now than as a kid. It was like nothing, it seemed like, and then now it's starting to come back a little bit. No, there'll still be days you go and maybe not see a deer, but like we joked about earlier, but it's becoming better. I'm seeing more doe groups and things that are there, and I believe that the landscape is still able to sustain that, because that's one of the things of like, I believe that the lower deer densities have helped with deer being healthier, growing bigger racks, bigger bodies, because they have the food available. But in a lot of places, especially where they're doing active cutting and they're doing things that are creating more browse and creating more sunlight to hit the floor and grow up all this stuff, that are still able to sustain it. Now I've seen the opposite, or I've seen where the deer herds have actually even gotten a little bit out of hand in places where they can't sustain it, when So I do the mountain buck scouting camp every spring, and I'm not going to take people on public ground where I would be at. So my buddy who's a forester, he manages some large tracts of private land that people lease out, and so I get permission to go use those properties, and seeing where, say, there's larger tracts of land, even though they're big woods, that don't there's not enough hunters to really to be able to curb the herd, or maybe they're not shooting does like they should, that you'll see 7, 8-year-old trees that are only knee high because they're all just browsed down, especially on the edges of the cuts. And he showed me that. He's like, how old do you think this tree is? I'm like, I don't know, a couple years old. And he's like, no, this is 7 or 8 years old. And he's like showing me all the spots where it was browsed down and had to restart basically to try to start growing. And but I don't know how I got on that tangent, but that was just
a deer. There's
yeah,
like where it was like went from like in some places it went from nothing to like now overly populated, where it can swing, you know, either way. And yeah, I mean, it's I mean, that's the allure sometimes like of the big woods kind of scenario, right? Is that you're not going to see a lot of deer necessarily, you know, but you know, if you're in the right spots, you have the potential to see one that would, you know, that's managed to figure out how to stay safe for a couple years, you know?
Yeah.
And it's cool to do battle with those because they are just cagey and I don't say smart, but they're just real good at staying alive, you know?
Super tough to kill. Like,
yeah,
it's funny. It's like, even with the more knowledge that you get and the more experience, it doesn't seem to make them any easier. And these places are being able to figure out. And even it's always crazy to me that, you know, even with as many trail cameras as I run in different places and stuff, that I'll still be surprised on deer that show up that I've never seen before. And that's cool. Like, I love that aspect of it. You know, I love looking at trail camera pictures and videos. Like, that's so much fun to me, just to look at them and be able to see them, and, you know, obviously getting that data and stuff. But there's also so many that slip through the cracks that you don't see, and that could be living in the area that just aren't in that 40-foot window in front of your camera to be able to walk in front of it.
Yeah, that's the hard part, right? Is like when you get that intel is not or don't get that intel, right? Like the inverse is true too, right? You don't get the picture of that deer, and then you start making bad plans on what you didn't see, right? And he's skirting your shit by like 20 yards, you know?
Yeah.
There's a scenario I'm thinking about now where it's like I'm almost certain like that's the case in a spot, you know, where, you know, that I've been skirted for like a little while, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's whenever you have when your intuition starts to have to play a role a little bit, right? Just like your woodsmanship and your intuition, right? And that's kind of like what your intuition is. It's like you've spent enough time in the woods and you've seen enough things where it's like you don't need to see it all necessarily, you know, where you can go, yeah, I think this is what's happening based on the things that I'm seeing, you know? And to me, that's kind of, sometimes it's more exciting what I don't see than what I do see, if that makes any sense, you know? And sometimes I think now, for whatever reason, as I go, I'm more intrigued by what I don't see than what I absolutely know.
Well, and I was talking to Brett Joy. He's in New Hampshire and he hunts the mountains up there. And he was, we were doing a talk at Huntstock, and him and I ended up having almost the same presentation. So we just did it together, and we were talking about trail cameras and you know, getting that intel of like, okay, you get a daylight picture of a buck, and it's like, oh man, he was only there once, and you know, every 3 weeks, which is kind of pretty typical. And it's like, he's like, I really put almost like a 5x multiplier on it for how much he's actually there versus, you know, he's like, if I get a picture in daylight of a buck, he's probably there quite a bit more than I'm thinking. And I always thought, you know, that they would be there more than my camera's picking them up. But when he put it that way, it was just like, that's an interesting perspective, and I don't disagree with him at all on it.
Right. Yeah. And I would say in some instances, depending on the scenario and why that deer is there in daylight during that particular time of year, whatever it is, the multiplier might even be higher.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? where I'm just thinking of a scenario where I'm like, you get a picture of a deer and it's, let's say it's rut, just as an example, right? Because I think that would be a good example to use. And you got a daylight picture of a deer you've been chasing one time, right? Well, there's a reason why he's there, right? During that time of year, right? We all know what it is. There's does somewhere that's close by that's bring him in that area. If he's got ripe does for the picking, do you think he's only going to be there one day? You know what I mean? Exactly. It's like, no, man, that guy is there until like does got bred, most likely, right? Or until like the one that is in heat has been bred, So it's like you probably got 5 days of him being in the general area. Now, whether he's going to be moving a lot or not, who knows, based on, whenever he's going to lock down or whatever the case is. But I would say he's probably going to be in the general area for 5 days, roughly.
Well, so the way I look at that is like, if you can tell that's why I love video on trail cameras, but being able to see his mannerisms, is he like wore down from running or is he just cruising? Because, last year in West Virginia, I was there and I was hunting the strip country and I could see a mile up on this mountain and I'm looking through the spot and scope. I watched one buck hit 5 different doe groups in like 25 minutes. I mean, the deer population's higher there, but like He was just beeline, boom, 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 and he was gone. And it's like, okay, because none of them are ready. But you get that situation where they, that there's an actual hot doe in the area, then he's gonna be there a lot more. And even if he does do that circle, he knows where those does are. He's probably gonna come back at some point and check them again when they are, ready per se.
Yeah. And that's when it becomes important to know the estrus dates roughly of your doe groups. And you and I have talked about this. It's like, for me, I love getting pictures of bucks, right? But if I can watch a spot over the course of 2 or 3 years and watch like when the action really kind of takes off, and I can kind of start to mark estrus dates around based on the activity, and go, boom, this spot's going to pop off like these 4 days, or like in this 4-day window, right? And this spot's going to pop off like in this 3-day window, right? It's like that to me is like this. That's probably my favorite way to use cameras is that way, Like, I mean, I love getting pictures of big bucks, but it's really kind of time stamping spots. So I know, to your point, it's like, is he just cruising through, or is he's gonna spend some time? Like, I want to hunt it whenever I know a good deer is going to spend some time in the area, and that's what those dates do for me.
If you were to break into my computer or my external hard drive,
I already did, Beau.
I keep it on an external hard drive in a lockbox, but where I have all my photos from the last 15 years categorized in there, it's like I save daylight doe photos from like October 10th really through the rut and through November, and I'll take note of that, even sometimes if they're not doing anything that looks like they're in heat, just knowing where the does are at those different times. And then like my favorite thing is like, if I see a picture of a doe that lays down next to a scrape, she is absolutely ready and waiting for a buck to come to her. And that's when I see that kind of stuff, that fires me up more than that big buck cruising through on the camera, because that just means that they're in the area and they're going to be there.
Yeah, that's the thing, man. It's like, that's like what I love about learning does in an area is just how consistent they are, right? Like you can build a plan around what they like to do, and we talked about this whenever I was on your show. It's like, that's exactly how I killed that deer in Kansas. That doe got him killed. She did the same. I knew she was going to do the same thing the next day, and he was going to be with her, and so I just used her as the bait, essentially, and so when you start to figure that stuff out, like that's where, to me, like when you start to figure that stuff out, you can build consistency off of that and not necessarily be a bed hunter. Because I think the one way to be consistent in trying to kill good deer is like to hunt bedding or hunt their beds, depending on how good you are at it, whether you're hunting a bed or you're just hunting a bedding area in general. And then I think the other way to be consistent is later in the year is to really understand what the does are doing and hunt them off the does, because they're going to live in a spot, they're going to eat in a spot, and they're really not going to move too far off of that pattern unless something forces them to.
Yeah, I mean, I have a calendar where I physically write out on of like areas and spots on dates because it's so hard during the season to remember it or
Yeah.
remember too late or what's going on. And it, sometimes those does could get killed or whatever else, and it changes things. But having, it's like, okay, that October 15th to 18th, and sometimes it's more even of scrapes or spots. It's like,
Hmm.
okay, this is what's. I was just talking to Paul Putera the other day about him and I always text back and forth, and then I had him on the show again, and we were talking about what he was finding with a lot of times the bedding is so random and some of the big wood spots are they're laying down in so many different even areas per se that it's like finding those consistencies with those scrapes and those things that
Hmm.
are around there because it can be difficult. And every
Yeah.
spot's so different because there's sometimes you'll find beds that bucks lay in it, a lot of times, and there's other ones like me and my dad have ran cameras on beds, and it'd be like, oh, this is a big worn down bed, big bucks laying here, and it's like get one or two photos on him over a month, and then there'll be small bucks using it and does using it,
Hmm.
and like everything else. So it's like really hard to build patterns specifically off of that in the areas that I'm hunting. But I find those consistencies with scrapes and doe groups,
Yeah.
and that's where yeah, I would put money on it a lot of times that you do there. And I think that one of the things that I've learned over years of doing this is just that it's just going to take time and you got to be confident in those places and spending more time than you think versus bouncing around
Hmm.
in those big woods. For me, that's been helpful, and it is hard sometimes, especially when you scout so many areas because you always think your other spots are better. But to want to bounce around and try to, you know, chase pictures or whatever. But
Yeah.
that's kind of what I see.
Yeah. I mean, the being a guy who, working dude, I think one of the best ways, or for working dudes out there in general, like for me, it's really important for me to go in on dates that I think that I'm like, I feel like no less than 75% sure that I'm going to have an opportunity or I'm going to see a buck, whether it's the one I want to shoot or not, who knows. And so, and I know you and I've talked about this, but I started doing exactly that where I don't have it on a calendar. What I use is I just go into Spartan Forge and I actually make a journal entry on in
Hmm.
like for a location, and I'll be like, whether it's a scrape or whether it's like a feed tree or whatever it happens to be, it'd be like, if I have trail camera data on it, especially if I've seen it physically, like while I was in the tree, I just go in and I mark the location and I put the dates that were like consistent, right? And I'm like, boom, here are the dates. And then every year I go back through my app and I look at like my journal entries and just kind of flip through them, and go like, all right, here's this October 17th to the 19th. All right, here's a spot. This is like the 21st to the 23rd, right? And I kind of go back and like mentally kind of get myself ready of like, okay, here are the spots I need to be in these time frames, right? Do I have a good deer in any of those areas, And that's kind of how I start to build my season. Like, to be honest, is based on that because, I have limited time, I have flexibility, but I still, don't have all the time in the world. So it's like when I go to hunt, it's like I got to hunt the right spot at the right time with the right condition and be like more surgical about it than I'm just going to go in and scout my way in and figure it out. I do some of that, but like as I've gone, it's like I do less of that now. And it's more of like spots are kind of dialed in and I kind of know. And like the scout my way in is like, I shouldn't say scout my way in, but like the scout to find the sign to hunt for the day is more of, if the conditions aren't right for any of the spots that are prime for that time frame and I don't really have a good spot to go to, then I'm going to go to an area that maybe I need to explore more and I'm going to do some scouting and just try to find something to set up on.
Yeah, it's good to have a lot of tools in your bag as
Yeah.
far as strategies go and things there. But and with doing that with the journal entries, what's nice is that you can see that historical weather too. If you
Mm-hmm.
put the exact dates that something was on there, it'll tell you what the weather was for that spot during that
Mm-hmm.
day. And it's like, okay, if it was like, all right, say you have 1 year of trail camera data in one spot, and it was like, October 22nd and 23rd were just like hot. But you look at it, and it was 33 degrees those days, but this year it's 65. Okay, it's like maybe those conditions aren't going to be the same as far as what you're going to see from an activity standpoint. So maybe that's not one you want to put as much, money on to
Right.
to go do. And it's just like that's just another data point to be able to put on there and be able to go from.
Yeah, yeah. It's and if you do it, and I love what you said about, you got to give yourself some time, and it can take, a couple seasons to kind of figure it out, because, you see something happen once, and it may just be an anomaly, right? You see it twice and you're like, maybe there's something to it. But I've always kind of felt, if I can see the same thing 3 times, and I'm not saying like in a hunt, like if you're hunting a spot, and you're watching deer, and you watch a buck cruise this edge that you're sitting 50 yards off of and not able to get a shot, you're like, are all the deer going to move out there? And then all of a sudden you see a doe take the same line of travel. It's like, well, I don't need to see it again. I'm getting down and I'm moving 30 yards. So I have a 20-yard shot to wherever they want to walk, because the chances of like the deer I want to kill walking that same line, pretty good, because I just saw 2 deer do the same thing.
Yep.
But when you're looking at qualifying areas, right, from like your scouting and trail camera data and stuff like that, I usually want like 3 years of consistent kind of intel. And that's when I go, all right, this is a trend now. Like, this is something I can actually start to build strategies off of, as opposed to like, if I see it once or twice, it's like, it may or may not be true. But if I see it happen 3 years in a row, I'm like, bingo. Probably that 3rd season, I'll probably make a hunt or make a plan around it, and then we'll see if it's validated or not. But if once I see it a 3rd time, then it's like, that goes in the journal entry of like, yep, we can kind of start to bank on this, unless something changes, unless the food changes around it, or like they come in and do a cut and changes the dynamic of like the habitat or whatever. But all things being equal, that activity should remain similar year over year for that spot.
Yeah, that's literally what me and Brett's presentation was, a 3-year plan. It's like, I need
good minds
3
think
years
alike.
I know, right? to really feel good about an area. And that's where it's important to have so many areas, because like or like you said, you can have that data in your plan. You're like, oh, I could get 3 days off of work and I'm going to go in here. But it's like, if you have one spot and they do log it, or there's a whole bunch of other pressure, maybe somebody leaked a photo of a big deer in the area and everyone's flooded there, well then, you're shit out of luck. And it's like, so having those backup places to be able to go to is and it takes time to build that whole arsenal up. But yeah, I'm in total agreement with you there.
Right. What's man, because your family has, so mountain hunting, right? That's what people know you for. That's what you're good at. I mean, you're good at a lot of things, but that's like your bread and butter, if you will, right? You grew up in that kind of area and stuff. But it's not just you. It's like your whole family, right? Like your dad, your brothers, right? And so I'm just curious, like, of all the time that you've spent like hunting the mountains and paying attention to them, you've had a killer podcast for years now, where like where you focus on helping educate and people understand how to hunt these kind of challenging, low deer density, challenging terrain kind of areas. Like, what is like one thing that, when you think about all the years and all the information that you've either gained, or someone has shared with you or whatever, that when you start to strip all the BS away, right? Because like, we all get infatuated with like certain ideas at certain points, right? And we try them. And then as we kind of go and we get a little older, we get a little bit more mature, and we start to really figure out what works for us. And like, yeah, this stuff here is like, that's like a Hail Mary idea. Like, you start to realize like some of these ideas are more Hail Marys than they are like consistent strategies to build success around, right? Like, what have you kind of distilled it down to that, like, for you, I'm not saying it's right for everybody, but for you, it's like the simplest principles of trying to kill a good deer in the mountains. Like if you could just boil it down to like the simplest thing of like, if you do nothing else other than these 3 things, like, these will help you find success.
I would say putting time into spots, like putting more time than you think.
And that's so counterintuitive to what everybody says too. Like, well, I shouldn't say everybody, but what we've heard from hunting media in general for years, which is like one spot, one sit, first sit, and then be mobile and move, right?
And that, do I believe that you have the best chance on the first sit? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Because you're not putting the scent in there, you're not doing that. But I just have seen it for 20 years now of like, that is the deer are more nomadic, or not using some of the same trails. It doesn't mean they're making 10-mile loops, but they're not doing the same things every day. So when you find that good sign, it's I believe it takes sitting multiple days on spots to even and I used to kind of throw that out for the early season as much, but even then, it's like there's that right there, I believe gives you more success or has a better opportunity at success than jumping around and chasing your tail of doing it. Like I've just seen that. My family's seen that across the board. Like we all hunt a little bit differently, but that's one thing that's very consistent with that across the board is putting the time into those locations when you have the confidence. Now the hard part is when you don't have the historical knowledge of shooting deer or in an area of making that confidence, of building that confidence. But once you see it enough and you scout enough and you go through, the light bulbs start to go off, Like when I go into an area now and I see something, there's a lot of times I'll be like, holy cow, like I get excited before I even know why I'm excited, if that makes sense. But then I like analyze it afterwards and it's like, okay, that's because I've had these situations where it's, laid out similarly. But that alone, I think, is something that if I tell anybody or give any advice from my experiences, because, with one thing I've learned that I cannot be consistent on is bed hunting. I just have not. I've found some that is able to work, and others that most of the time is chasing my tail, and it's like, it's not from an efficient standpoint. If you had all the time in the world, yeah, but like. For me, it's just not doing that. I find those consistencies in scrapes and certain doe groups and spots like that's, and even the scrapes can be earlier in the year. It doesn't mean that it's all rut focused, but finding those consistencies, building that confidence, and then putting the time in is where I think is where you can really increase your success there.
Right. I would agree with you, man. Like I think for a while, like it went out of, it became unpopular to like hunt the same spots, right? Like I remember like 7 years ago, right? It was like, different spot every sit, And then I think it became a little bit more acceptable when people were kind of doing that. And that was also when like the mobile hunting craze really kind of kicked off, right? And I've always kind of thought like, to me, mobile hunting wasn't about how often you could move. It was about having the ability to move and get into position where you're going to have your best opportunity, and not be stuck in a spot. So there's a difference between hunting a spot multiple times because it's the right spot versus being stuck in a spot because you're not mobile, right? Like those are different things,
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I was just going to say, when you're talking about and also hunting the same spot, it doesn't always have to mean you're wearing the bark out of a tree. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Like that, it can be moving within that spot. Say the wind's changing, because that's the question I get is like, oh, well, the wind's different the next day, or it's like, okay, maybe you could be moving 50 yards, you could be moving just a little bit within, but in that area and that spot and that feature of whatever you're there for, that is what I'm talking about with being in there. Because like honestly, like that was a deterrent of even like, or not a deterrent, I don't know what the right word is, but something that was a negative from when I had started the podcast. The year after I started the podcast, I think it was 2019, was my roughest year ever, and I was bouncing around like crazy. And I think it was also my first year hunting from a saddle, and where I just felt like, oh, I could just go all
anywhere.
over the place.
Right.
And it was the toughest year that I had, and I was like, man, before I was doing that, I'd find some of these spots and I would sit there for sometimes 5 days and not see a deer, not see many deer throughout it, but I knew that they were good spots for that time of year, and eventually it would pay out. And I just always had that in my mind, and I changed it because I was getting influenced too much from outside things, and that could work, and that probably does work, obviously, in different areas. But for my areas, it was like, this is what, and low deer density and big woods in the mountains, it was like, that was, to me, it was like, okay, I need to go back to, what I was doing before I didn't know all this stuff.
Yeah. It's, I think the way it works for me is locally, I'm probably a little bit more patient and focused because I just have better knowledge of like my home area, like whether just in Pennsylvania in general, the spots that I hunt in Pennsylvania, right? Where I do kind of subscribe to almost a different kind of spot every day is whenever I'm traveling. And usually when I travel to hunt, I don't scout the area that I'm going to hunt. I just show up cold and figure it out on the fly. And so I might only have 7 days, so I can't spend 3 sitting in a spot if I don't know for sure that there's going to be a deer come through there. And so that is when I will jump, and I will just chase the hot sign, and that's when I will use that, right? Because when you're chasing that hot sign, it's like you don't know if that deer that made that sign is going to come back or not. You know what I mean? So when I'm hunting locally, it's like I'm not basing a whole lot off of that unless it's in an area that I know already and know that deer want to spend time in. And then it's like that's when I'll tweak my setup. You know what I mean? And so to your point of not wearing the bark out of a tree, Litzinger is real good about, like, it's something that I've talked to him a good bit about. And when he and I have had the opportunity to scout together, that I've kind of had him walk me through like his approach to selecting trees. Cause that dude, he's so good at finding the right tree. Like he's good at finding the kill tree. Yep. And it's something that I'm still not great at for whatever reason. But he's real good about picking out multiple trees in a single spot, in a single location, to be able to hunt it on multiple winds, and so that's something now that I try to pay attention to, and sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes like that spot's only going to work for one wind. It just depends on the setup. Right. But now, like when I go in, it's like I make sure to pay attention and go, all right, this is the primary tree that I want to hunt. Like this is the end all be all tree, but can I cut the wind a little bit differently here? And will it work for my access still? If I hunt this tree or if I hunt this tree, that way I can maybe get a couple hunts out of it without, using the same tree. The spot I killed my buck in PA last year, there's 2 trees that I have in there and they're only 20 yards apart. And it's literally for the same wind, but I'll hunt one. And if I have any deer come through, the next time I hunt it, I hunt the opposite tree. And it's a little dicier because I don't have as good of an opportunity because I am a little dirty on my wind where they will win me at some point, the way they come in. But the way that tree is set up is I will have an opportunity to shoot them before they win me. The other, the best tree that I have that I killed out of last year, there's no chance they win me. Like it's one of those setups where it's like I'm pretty much bulletproof in that spot. And but I've selected that second tree because I'm like, if I just need the element of surprise because I've had deer come through and they maybe know something's up on this side of coming in on this trail, I'm going to set up on that side of it and have an opportunity, and so it's just making those small little things, and they're literally only separated by like 20 yards.
Yeah, man, like that yeah, that's that, when I'm looking at trees, it takes me sometimes 45 minutes to pick where I'm going to be at. Like I was just in a spot where I found like one of the best spots I found cold in a new area, and I was just like excited. I had my cousin Mason with me, and he was just as pumped. But we were picking different trees, and he's explaining why he's picking them, and so we have like there's a few options that I have, and probably too it'll take me hunting it to see exactly how that wind's going to be doing there and where the deer are actually traveling from versus just what's in my head of like, okay, this, and then have to make some moves or adjustments there. And Greg is phenomenal at that. And Greg's a really good bed hunter too, which I look up to him for it. It's funny when I do my scouting camp, him and my dad always request each other to go with because they have such opposite hunting styles, but they feed off each other and learn from each other so much. It's a really cool way to be able to see it. No, I've learned so much from Greg. He's the real deal for sure.
Yeah, he's the OG.
He is.
Yeah, it's always fun spending time with him in the woods. Just because the way he sees things, I pick up so much stuff from him. And it's not even that we discuss some of it, and like and he's so quick at picking out trees, because we'll stop and he'll ask me like, "What tree you hunting here?" He's like, when he asks me, he's already picked 3.
Oh yeah, he's already got it.
Yeah, he already knows which 3 of the trees that he would be in, and he'll ask me and won't say anything, and I'll be like, I'll look around, I'll be like, maybe this one. It'll take me 5 minutes, and I'll talk myself through like a couple of different, and I'll be like this one, and he'll go, yeah, he's like that one could work, and I'm like, all right, I'm like, well, which ones are you? He's like, I would hunt this for this one, this for this one, this for this one, and he's already got like all the reasons why, and the kick in the balls was the one year we scouted this one area, and we walked through and found an awesome setup, big primary scrape, just a killer spot. And it's actually a really killer spot this year. When I pulled I didn't hunt it at all last year, and I pulled the camera on it this year or this spring, and there were bucks daylighting in that spot I think every day but 3 in October. Like ridiculous, like bananas. Like I would just love to go in there and just film like the whole month of
Yeah.
October, because it should be fire. Um, and but the first year I found it, I went in, I had a good encounter with like 2 different bucks, and one I passed, and one I wanted to kill, but I just never got the shot. And when Greg and I went in there, I told him which tree I was going to hunt. He was like, he's like, that's going to be tough. Like, he's like, it's a good spot. He was like, it's either going to be a slam dunk shot or you're going to just be out of the game. Right. And the buck that I could have killed that I passed was a slam dunk 5-yard shot. The one that I wanted to kill was behind this brush, like 12 yards away, and I couldn't get a shot. In the tree that he picked, whenever we were walking through, he's like, I would hunt this tree. I would have killed that deer. It would have been a like 8-yard shot to the deer that was like the one that I wanted to kill. And so we always kind of laugh about that now because like he picked the right tree. So this year I went back in and I marked the right tree. So if I go back in and hunt it, it'll be the tree that actually Greg picked out.
That's funny. Well, there's so much value in if you have buddies that you can go scouting with, take to your
100%.
areas, you go to theirs to get the different perspectives. For example, recently I took Johnny Stewart into one of my areas that I've hunted for 10 years. And I have so many preconceived notions on things that like that almost is a detriment to me.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the spots he had picked out was a spot that I hadn't hunted in 5 years, but I actually killed a deer there in 2016 and was like, and I'm like, why did I just like throw this out of my mind? And then another spot was where I was actually hunting this year, but he had, he adjusted the setup where he had picked, like by, I don't know, 75 yards, but there was this a real flat area, and it was just this little tiny drain that came up, and I was hunting the scrape right where it met a clear cut edge, and he's like, were you getting this deer on camera? I said, yeah, in early October, and then by, late October, he disappeared, and he's like, I think that deer knew you were hunting him here, and he's slipping back in the cover, and he might have been there still, but he was just back in a little bit, because he was there before I was hunting it. I was in a different state and came back, and I think I saw him one time right at dark, but it was just like, and then I saw him once on October 30th, and he was going through the middle of this beach brush and just like in the thick of it, and it was just like that little adjustment, but it was for some reason when Johnny said it, it was, well, not also like I'm very lucky Johnny is an absolute killer, so having him there with me is, but even people that may even be greener on it, just getting their perspective. I've watched Johnny scout with people that were a lot less experienced than him, and him ask them more questions than they were asking him, of just seeing, he's like, I want to know different perspectives on how you're looking at the woods and being able to see it. And it helps so much. And this year we did that a bunch where, then I went to one of Johnny's spots where he knows I hunt a lot of beaver ponds, and he was like, hey, this deer, he's in early October, he's coming here, but I can't figure it out, and I think he's winding me and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, I've seen it in this scenario with beaver ponds. Sometimes they'll lay down in that bottom just up on the bank overlooking that beaver pond. He's like, he gets down there, we find a bed, and he's like, he can see me where I'm coming in. He's like, and everything just clicked. But it was just like, there's those scenarios where it helps having somebody else to be able to bounce off of.
Yeah, it's always good to have a second set of eyes. If you have the luxury of being able to take a good buddy who's who knows their stuff, and can just bounce ideas off of each other. I do that a lot. It's like, I'll have a call with Greg, during the season where I'm like, hey, this is what's happening or whatever. Or I was talking with Dan Enfold on Monday about a scenario, and just kind of bouncing some stuff off of him, and he's like, oh yeah, he's like, that's probably how I do it, but I would change it like this, and it's just, those guys that have been just like him or like Johnny that are just like, that almost like, I don't want to say deer whisperers, but they've just seen and done so much, where they can diagnose something pretty quickly, just giving them a scenario, right? Like they've seen that 1,000 times already, and they've hunted that exact same scenario before, and they can tell you like, here's how I screwed it up. So you can probably check those off the list. And here's like the 3 times that I killed a deer doing exactly that, and here's how I did it, and it's not like it's an exact roadmap, but man, it did 2 things talking to Dan. It validated a lot of things I thought I knew. Like when I was explaining it to him, he was like, yep, I would think that too, And then the other part of it was how I was considering like the approach. He was like, that's how I approached when I killed this deer in Wisconsin in a similar setup, in a similar situation. So what it does is like you go in with confidence, because it's not just you that knows
builds
it,
that confidence.
but it's like someone you really respect who knows their shit is saying, I wouldn't do anything different. Now, whether you fill a tag or not remains to be seen, but that's how I would start, And so you go into it going, I got a good plan. Like this, this is a good kind of roadmap for me to follow, and like part of it is just thinking it can happen,
Yeah, yeah, that's a lot of it. And it's so funny that I think you and I have talked about this before, but when I go into anybody else's spots, for some reason I get this like jealousy of like, I always feel like everybody's spots are better than mine. And then like I took we were doing a scouting video, it's coming out. I took my dad into the spot and I was like, here's this scrape down here and blah blah blah, and I was like, but I want to find more and go through it, and my dad was just like, this is a scrape I dream of. I'm like, what? like I knew it was good, but like I didn't have that kind. And then it's like it just like rebuilt this confidence in me. Like, I just gotta get in there more. I gotta do this.
Sometimes you just need someone to believe in what you believe in too. You know what I mean? It's as simple as that. Because I mean we're our own worst critics at times. Especially if you've been doing it for a little while. Because I feel like you and I are kind of like at a similar kind of spot, right? And I was talking with someone about this one day, and I feel like you and I, we hunt similarly to a degree, and I feel like we're at similar places in terms of, I don't want to say our capability, but like someone asked me one time if hunting had belts like jiu-jitsu, right? They asked me like, what belt would you be? And I said, I was like, I'd probably be like a purple belt. I was like, because I feel like I have like, I know what I'm doing. I've got like all the foundational stuff. I was like, in a purple belt really in jiu-jitsu is like, that's your first advanced belt where it's like, jiu-jitsu, as much jiu-jitsu in terms of techniques and stuff like that as you'll probably ever know. You'll get some new stuff, but you'll forget some stuff and shit like that. Right. But it's like, that's when you really start to sharpen your sword, right? And become an expert, so to speak. Right. And not saying that we're experts, right? But it's like, but what they said to me was like, and this person was actually a black belt in jiu-jitsu. And so they were like, actually, I look at you as like a black belt. And I was like, really? He was like, yeah, man. He was like, all the foundational stuff. He's like, it comes to you. Like, you don't need to really think about it. It just like, it. He's like, and then he's like, because of that, he's like, you're really quick to be able to evolve, like, and learn and take something new and use it, He's like, and so a black belt in jiu-jitsu, like there's levels, like there's like a guy who just got his black belt, and then there's like Dan Enfalt, who is like a 6th degree black belt, right? Like to where it's like he spent more time as a black belt than it took for you to get your black belt. You know what I mean? Yep. Type of thing, right? And so like I feel like where we're at now is like when you first get your black belt in jiu-jitsu, because I've heard this from like any of the guys that I know who are black belts, when they first got it, they felt like they didn't know anything. They felt like it was starting over, because now they actually knew enough to like actually really learn jiu-jitsu. And I feel like that kind of is where you and I are at. It's like we've learned enough now to where we know enough about bow hunting, right, or deer hunting, that we can now actually learn how to deer hunt, right? And so that's why we start to question some of the stuff, because like now it's like believing in all the things we know. Like we know all the things. It's now becoming like the component of like, now you need to believe in all those things, And that to me, it's like when you said that, it rang true, because I was like, my God, I was like, I do the same thing, All right, folks, we're back. Had a little break there. Had to take a little intermission, but before we shut this thing down, I always love talking to you, man, because we end up talking every time we get together for like 2+ hours. It seems like before, during, after, But it'd be bad on my part if we didn't get a chance to talk about what we have coming up for the year, because I know you got some cool hunts coming up, and I always kind of look forward to hearing like what your plans are and like what you got going on. So as we're kind of heading into the upcoming season, what is on your radar, and like what is your confidence level for each of these kind of hunts, and maybe like what are you most looking forward to?
Oh man, honestly, I'm looking forward to elk hunting.
Because
Like
you didn't go last year, right? You skipped last year,
no,
right?
no,
Yeah.
I went up to Alaska moose hunting last year, which was awesome. But I have two incredible elk tags in my pocket, so like it's just like that's what's first in the front of my mind. And honestly, like I don't want to put the cart in front of the horse here, but I feel really confident about them, and I've been just shooting as good as I ever have, and
Nice.
just like for me, I realized that especially over the last 5 years, my success has been limited to my ability to be able to kill in that moment when I needed to, not as much as far as finding those opportunities, which is like that wasn't the case before. It was always just trying to find those opportunities, and it's like okay, I've you know have learned or been able to put in the work to be able to get those opportunities, just capitalizing on them right. So I'm practicing, even not saying that I'm always missing or anything, but even just like shot opportunities that I probably should have took advantage of that I didn't feel confident and things with knowing the ranges. So I've been shooting in the yard like crazy where just throwing arrows out in different places and keeping the same pin and shooting different, pin gaps and doing that stuff and seeing where my arrows hitting at different levels. And so anyways, that's a long way of saying like I feel really good about so I got a tag in Utah and in Montana, so I'm pretty
Nice.
pumped about that.
That's awesome, man. Those would be great
Yeah,
hunts, dude. Those are.
yeah,
I have a. I think I'm planning to go to Utah one of these years. Whenever I start to venture away from Idaho, which will probably be starting next this year, just because my buddy lives in Idaho and they changed their tag system, as and for non-residents and stuff. So it'd be a little bit more challenging to get a tag. So I'll probably start burning some points in some different states I've been accruing points for over the past couple seasons or whatever, and start using some of those for elk and mule deer. My shooting, man, I've been shooting a lot of longbow like all winter and spring into the summer. Finally, kind of broke out the compound again because I'm taking that on the Idaho trip, and then most of my whitetail stuff will be with the longbow. Like I'm about 75% certain that that's going to be the case. We'll see. I might be one of the situations where like both bows are in the truck and it'll be a game time decision.
yeah,
you know, the but it's crazy because like they're saying you shooting as good as you ever have, because I'm kind of in the same boat where like even though I haven't shot my compound a lot, but shooting that longbow has just made me focus so much. Like my focus is so much better because I have to, or otherwise the longbow, it's like I'm not even close.
yeah,
And so now when I dial in and I shoot, it's like, man, it's like that pin's burning a hole through like where I'm trying to land. It's like I'm just dropping arrows like right where I want to land them. And talking about throwing arrows, like I started doing that a couple years ago where I would just, because I shoot a single pin, and so I'd throw arrows in the yard and I would just shoot from wherever that was at, and make the adjustment on the fly or whatever. And it
yep,
helps a ton because I mean that was how I shot that deer last year. It was like I didn't even range him. Like I mean I knew roughly where he was at because I ranged a couple things like when I sat down, but where he came in, like I don't know exactly what the distance was, like where he was standing. But because of like shooting with one pin and knowing like my capability with that one pin, I just like let it rip and was good. It was good to go. So that's like, I think people don't spend enough time shooting at funky yardages. I feel like they walk out in their yard and they're like, I'm shooting at 20 or I'm shooting at 30 or I'm shooting at 25, as opposed to like, this is 26 and a half. This is 28 and a half. This is 23 and a half. You know what I mean? Like this is 45 and a half or 42. You know what I mean? Like just different, odd yardages and stuff like that. I think is just critical for real world scenarios.
yeah. Like and that's where I've learned. So I shoot. It's a kind of a single pin, but it's got three dots on it. But you don't
Mm-hmm.
move the other dots, but it's vertical. I like that, but I leave my top one for elk hunting at 30 because I've learned that even down to 15 yards, I'm only 6 inches high with that 30-yard pin, but that gives me a little bit more maneuverability from that 30 to 40 with using that
Mm-hmm.
top pin, and it's only dropping a little bit, and then you look at kind of what an elk's vitals are and the size of them, and it's like, okay, I have some room to not be exactly knowing the yardages, because what I've learned with elk hunting is rarely, do you get a chance to sit there and range things. Things happen fast, and you're on the
Mm-hmm.
fly, and you're chasing after them, and all this stuff. So there's so much value, and even with even with whitetail hunting, it's a little bit different where I'm able to range trees, and that's what I'm doing all day is
Yeah.
ranging trees. But even then, just knowing where your bow's hitting and how it's shooting, and I actually dropped my arrow weight a little bit this year just to have a shorter draw length to try to have a little bit more flatter trajectory,
Hmm.
and and kind of go through that. So it's just been working on those things to
Yeah.
hopefully then that the opportunities come and being able to capitalize on it. So, but what you said about building the points, like I'm in a really good spot right now where I started building points like 7-8 years ago. So I'm starting to get some good tags and
Hmm.
starting to roll through, and it's like it's pretty exciting and
Yeah.
to be able to have that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like I'm looking, I have a hunt plan that I built with some folks. And so I just been accruing points for like a handful of states for, several years now. And the goal was to be able to buy good tags where I could hunt a representative mature animal for the state. You know what I mean? Like that was
Yep.
the idea. It wasn't like I wasn't looking to draw like trophy units or anything like that. I just wanted like good kill opportunities, with quality animals. Doesn't mean I want to kill the biggest or whatever. Just want good hunt experiences. And next year should be like the first year that I could draw one of the states for one of the species. And then the way I have it set up is like I'll be able to kind of roll through each state like every year while I'm accruing points for the state I just bought. And then by the time I get through all my states, I'll be back and have enough points to
Yep.
draw that state again. And so I'll basically have a recurring circle of states that I can draw from now until I decide that I don't want to go anymore, essentially. You
Yeah.
know. And I forget what all the states were. Like I know it was Montana, Colorado for mule deer specifically, that one. And then Utah, maybe. I think there was like four states I think I had.
Wyoming.
Wyoming was one of them. Yep.
Yep.
Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, Montana. I think that was it. I think it was those four. In each one of those states, I think I was getting points for both mule deer and elk. I think is what
Yeah.
it was.
No, I'm in the same boat. Other than Montana, I don't get deer points just because the general tag covers most of the state. So that's
Right.
kind of what I'm doing there. But I also added Arizona
Hmm.
in addition to yours is like my long-term
Right.
play. But you also have a chance every year when you apply at drawing a really good tag because they
Right.
allot a small percentage just to randomness. But
Right.
and then I also throw New Mexico, but you're not building points there. It's just
Yeah.
a random every year. But
Yeah.
I usually apply there as well
Right.
to be able to see. But I thought I was gonna have an Iowa tag this year, and I was like certain that I had
Right.
enough points
Point
to draw
creep.
a tag, and
Yeah.
I didn't. Yeah, I didn't draw it. So
Yeah.
that was, But I have a really good year, anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. I had enough points to attempt, but I didn't think I had 4 this year, and I didn't think I'd draw with 4, so I held off. I was like, I'm just
I
gonna
had 5.
wait. Really? Yeah.
Mhm.
My plan is to just wait until my daughter graduates from high school because I think I've mentioned this to you before. Like, because she's got 2 more years. Because when I draw the next time, I'm going to go out and just move and work and live out there. Well, since I work remote, and I'm just going to go out like beginning of October or end of September, and I'm going to stay basically through like Thanksgiving and just hunt and work and hunt like I live there,
Yeah.
mornings, evenings, weekends, and then takes time off if I don't fill a tag earlier in the year, then take some time off during that like late October, beginning of November timeframe. It's kind of the
Yeah.
plan. But my new kick now, man, is I'm on the trying to convince the wife to. She lets me do anything I want. Like she's never told me no about like hunts when I was in a band, like nothing. Right? There's one place where she draws the line, and that is Alaska brown bear with a bow. Like she's like, nope. And that's like the thing I'm trying to convince her of. I'm like, come on. I was like, it's safe, man. Like you got like someone with you with a gun. I was like, it's all good. So that's my like thing I've been kind of reading up on lately is wanting to go do that. So
Oh man, that would be absolutely killer.
yeah. We'll see if it
Talk
happens
about
or not.
talk about a rush of that. I want to hunt.
Yeah.
I never did want to hunt brown bear, or grizzly, and then the more I've talked to people that have experienced those types of hunts, the more I want to. But
Mhm.
I think I want to do it with a gun first.
Yeah. I sometimes contemplate that. I think she might let me do that if I'm trying to shoot one
Yeah.
from 200 to 300 yards away versus like 15 yards, But
Yeah.
there's
And
something.
even with gun, sometimes you're shooting them pretty close.
Yeah.
It's just also the safety factor of it.
Yeah,
I don't know,
yeah,
something
yeah.
about drawing a stick and string back at that yardage, even though obviously it'll do the job. It's just
Right.
like, eh.
Dude, I had a buddy shoot one with a recurve at like stupid close. Like he shot a hammer of a brown bear with a recurve, and I was like, dude, I was like, what was the pucker factor on that? He's like, dude, I was making diamonds. Man, but we've been on, dude, for a little while now, man. I know you got stuff going on. I got to actually get ready to head to an appointment as well. Always love talking to you, brother. You know, I wish we get to see each other face to face more often than we do. One of these days, we need to do a hunt together at some point. Maybe we'll do that brown bear hunt together. Maybe we'll plan that. Yeah, that's
I
it.
like that.
And but before you get out of here, man, let people know where they can follow along with everything you got going on with East Meets West, and you know, anything you have going on with YouTube. You got some Make Deer Camp Great Again swag that's out in the world. Rep it.
Yep.
So let folks know where they can find all that stuff.
Yeah, so you can follow along Instagram, Facebook, either my name, Beau Martonik, or East Meets West Hunt. YouTube channels, Beau Martonik, and then the podcast, East Meets West Hunt. You can find that anywhere. And if you don't remember any of that, just eastmeetswesthunt.com, and you can find links to all that stuff there, including these shirts, and I got hats and bumper stickers and flags and a whole bunch of stuff to make Deer Camp great again. Funny thing was, Clint, before you let me go, I put these as the time of recording this on the website a couple days ago, and these green ones, I should have known people like the green the most, but it was like they sold out in a couple hours, and I was like, all right, I got to get another order of those rolling in. So
right, that's awesome, man.
It made sense with the year. It was actually just really funny. I was talking to some people, and I was like, "Yo, we need to make Deer Camp great again." I was like, light bulb click.
Light bulb.
Like, yeah.
How you're gonna make your millions is your Make Deer Camp great shirt.
That's it. That's how I'm gonna be somebody.
Right, exactly. Awesome. Well, you're always somebody in my book, dude. So I always appreciate.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, man. You're one of my favorite people, man. I love talking to you. Not just because you're a PA boy, but just like you do things the right way. You have a passion for what we do. You care deeply about, you know, what it is that we do, you know, the thing that we love. Always comes through in the stuff that you do. Always comes through anytime you and I talk. And you're just one of the good ones, brother. And I appreciate our friendship.
No, likewise, man. Thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, just really appreciate it.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. And if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there too. And before I shut this thing down, we need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Osseo Gear, Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, and Genesee Beer. And until next time, we'll see y'all.